Hello, everyone, and welcome back to McFly's Movie House. I'm your host, Marta McFly, and I hope everyone is doing well. I'm very jazzed for today's episode. It's on a director that I only really got into, I want to say, early last year, but he's swiftly become one of my personal favorites just for his ability to create such human and gentle stories that touch people on a global scale, and that filmmaker is Abbas Kiarostami. So for today, we'll be highlighting four of his movies, and I also brought on a guest to help me out. So he's a serious wealth of knowledge, and he's honestly just someone I love turning to for movie suggestions or even just to talk shop and analyze certain films. He's a writer as well, and he's covered countless topics. I mean, film, obviously, but also 20th century American history, tons of other stuff. Most recently, actually, his essay for Brightwell Dark Room titled Hollywood's Last Cowboy, which tackled Leo DiCaprio's work in Westerns. That was a pleasure to read, and I highly suggest checking it out. He also has his own podcast called Visceral Reactions, and that highlights the intersection between pop culture, history, and politics throughout the last century of horror films. So that's just a morsel of his impressive resume. But I'm going to welcome Matthew Germenis to the pod. Hello, my friend. How are you?
Hi, Marta. Thank you so much for a lovely introduction.
Thank you.
Being referred to as a wealth of knowledge from a wealth of knowledge is wonderful. And a huge compliment. So thank you for that.
Of course. Well, before we get into things properly and the discussion at hand, I always ask my guests to highlight what it is they've watched recently, honestly, for selfish reasons, so I can add it to
Hmm.
my watch list, but also
Of
for everybody
course.
else.
Um, I mean, you you already know this, but so far this weekend, I've been getting into the Magic Mike trilogy, and I can't recommend that enough. I haven't seen the third one yet, but the first two have just blown me away. I really, I mean, just for a lot of personal reasons in terms of, I know we're not here to discuss Magic Mike, but just, like as far as like what uh, male friendship means and what it looks like when you focus on listening to each other and listening to not just your bros but listening to women. And it's why I think the movies are like really really uh, so much more intelligent than like the male stripper you know designation would lead one to believe. So yeah, that's just been on my mind a lot. So
I love that. I mean,
yeah.
yeah, you're right. We were talking about it the other day, and I dismiss those movies. I've never seen them, but honestly, the way you describe it makes me want to go on a Magic Mike binge. So that's in my
Yeah,
near future.
absolutely. All three are on Hulu, so now's the time to do
Amazing.
it. Yeah.
Good. Well, to break down the episode for all of you and for you, Matthew, we're going to give a general overview of who Kiarostami was. Then we'll get into his Koker Trilogy, and I'll explain why I chose that. There's obviously a reason. And then we'll also talk about each of those three films individually, and then cover Taste of Cherry. And again, there's a reason. There's a reason for everything. But yeah, I'm kind of bummed I went for that instead of my personal favorite, The Wind Will Carry Us, which I urge everybody to check out. Have you seen that? Just out of my own curiosity.
No, not yet. So
It's it's good.
I mean, everything I've seen from him is just that level of sublime that you would want and hope for. So I have no
Mhm.
doubt that it's just going to continue that trend.
Totally. It's a very lyrical movie. I think it also makes a good companion piece to Taste of Cherry, actually, because it's much lighter both in tone and visually. But I digress. So it's great to have you on here today.
Thank
And
you.
for those of you listening, the reason why I chose you for this episode as your first appearance is because Kiarostami was the first filmmaker you and I connected over, right?
Yes, it was. Yeah, he was. Yeah, and I think even more so, Taste of Cherry was really the first one that got brought up. Not to like jump ahead, but yeah.
Totally. And what about his cinema speaks to you?
Um, I really love simplicity.
Hmm.
I mean, it's one of the reasons why someone like Bergman is such a huge uh, influence for me and such a huge part of what I look for and what I want from film is that there is nothing as simple as like the connection between two people. And I think someone like Kiarostami in one of I think in the documentary that I was just watching that he did for French TV, he said that people are, they talk about love more than anything else, and there's nothing more simple than that. So why not just make movies about that? Why should movies be anything more than that when that's the only thing that we want to talk about with each other,
Hmm.
whether it's love for each other, love for other people, love for things, for art, like whatever. It's the life force that drives us. And Kiarostami, I think, is someone who distills that love so beautifully. I mean, using the phrase like visual poetry is almost a disservice for what he does, but it's the essence of life, and he captures that in a way that a few other directors I think can, but no one can do it better.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, I totally agree. He's, like you said, just those stories about love and about being human. He's the sort of director that I turn to whenever I'm feeling down because they're just such peaceful movies. I think they really show compassion and human resilience, and I find that super comforting. And I mean, I know you said that does it a disservice a little bit, but I describe his work as visual poetry sometimes. The reason behind that is because I think Kiarostami was also a poet, right? And Iran, where he's from, the culture and the language is filled with proverbs and metaphors. So you read his poetry and you realize it just all comes together in your mind so cinematically, right? And he's just an artist where I think all these mediums mesh so well together. Have you had a chance to read his poetry?
I don't believe so. I mean, maybe years ago when like
Uh
first
huh.
getting into him, but not recently, and definitely not. Honestly, the thought didn't even cross my mind because I guess just getting caught up in the visual world, it almost felt like that was the
Hmm.
poetry itself. So, I mean, it's just something else to dive into.
Totally. Well, I guess this makes for a great segue into people wanting to know more about him. So, yeah, let's dig into his background. If you want to add anything that I've missed, by all
Sure.
means, jump in. So, Abbas Kiarostami. He was born in Tehran on June 22nd, 1940. And when he was still a youth, let's call him, he developed an interest in painting. And this was his first passion before film. I think this is an interesting point to make. I don't know about you, but when I watch his films, particularly those ones made in Iran, I'm always blown away by these striking images of nature, these
Hmm.
seemingly endless hills, these gorgeous trees. What do you think?
I think like after you've watched even just one of his movies, to hear that he was a painter or has the painterly interest or the painterly mind, I think similar to like Kurosawa, it's like, of course, like there's no way someone who can compose an image with such depth and awareness of each object's awareness, not just to each other, but to space itself.
Hmm.
I mean, I don't know of anyone who could make simple olive trees look profound the way that he does. It's like it's I was going to say the talent is ungodly, but I think it's actually the opposite. I think it is almost a divine gift that he has to just take something as simple as an olive tree and to turn it into like the most beautiful thing that you've ever seen. And yeah, it's like, I mean, thinking of like, when it comes to art, of the masters who can turn the simple things into the images that never leave you. So
Hmm.
yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's impossible not to look at each frame and see the brushstrokes, but
Hmm.
also, I don't know, almost like not see them as well, or no, you're seeing them because he wants you to see it, because he wants you to always think about the fact that you're watching a movie in
Hmm.
addition to. not thinking about film. Like he wants you to think about
Yes.
life. Like it's they're inseparable. They're inseparable for him.
Yes.
Yeah.
I love that. I love that. So, first of all, that was beautiful. Like
Well, thank you.
that was beautiful.
Oh my
But
goodness.
back to the story. So
Yeah.
he flunked out of his university. It was a fine arts program, and at 18, he took a job as a traffic cop. But he enrolled in another art school, and he did both of those things at the same time, which then led him to a job as a commercial artist for book covers and posters. I think he also did title cards for movies or credit sequences. And then he started doing, yeah, TV commercials. I believe he made over 150 throughout the 60s. And for all of you creatives who think that your time has passed, because I go through this all the time, Kiarostami was basically almost in his 30s when he spoke to the director of Kanan. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right. But he was a good friend of his, and he invited him to set up a film sector for the company in 1969. Now, what was Kanan? It was the Institute for Intellectual Development of Children and Young Adults. And for them, they made educational films. So what's interesting actually to note here as well is that, yeah, he made these types of films, but Kanan also went on to produce movies by Iranian New Wave filmmakers, which was a movement that Kiarostami was a part of. And many of these figures were essentially trained on his feature films. So he did a lot more for Iranian cinema as a whole. Is there anything I'm missing here?
I don't think so. I mean, other than just going into, which could be an entirely other episode of like the
Yes.
childhood films themselves,
Yes. Yes.
which are, again, it's like when you watch everything that all of his narrative features, it's like, well, yeah, of course, like look at what he started doing, with
Mm-hmm.
the just the subjects of childhood and children and, focusing on like places of learning and it's really interesting to see how these documentaries, for the most part, about simple things like homework. I mean, that which is
Mm-hmm.
just a brilliant one. That like anyone who can take an hour of interviewing children about homework and turn it into something that is just so engrossing, where you're like, why why aren't there more things like this? And
Mm-hmm.
it's just whenever someone pays attention to the small things and shows you how beautiful they are, that's someone that I think can't have enough praise heaped upon them, because it's like a reminder to enjoy living and to
Mm-hmm.
enjoy the things that make life worth it. And it's like every movie of his, regardless of what it's about, it's like that's it.
Mm-hmm.
Like that's
Mm-hmm.
that's the key. Um, I'm jumping around, so
Please, please. It's fine.
so it's like it's there. Like even years before, decades before he does the movies that we're talking about, the sensibility is so oh, it's already so well defined. It's so
Mm-hmm.
pronounced that I mean, really, this is he's just a talent that I don't know. I mean, it's yeah, it's too easy to gush about. I mean, it's like talking about like why does ice cream give you joy? Like why is the sunset beautiful? Why do a lot of why do birds sound pretty when they sing? It's like whatever the answer is to that, it's like why are Kiarostami's movies worth watching?
Totally.
It's yeah,
Yeah. I'm gonna rewind for a second, but I will
yeah, please.
piggyback on what you said.
Sorry.
Um, totally cool. No, I loved it. The
Yeah.
reason we're explaining these Kanan, oh, this is gonna bug me so much. Anyways, the reason why we're explaining those movies is because, as you said, a lot of them were centered around classrooms or they included kids, and they sought out to teach people a certain lesson or some form of lesson. And I was reading an interview with Kiarostami, and he said that during this period, it was quite freeing for him because he didn't have any sort of boss pressuring him to make any sort of film that they wanted, just free of narrative constraints. So he was really able to develop his own style. However, he also said, and I wrote this down, we noticed that most films then weren't suitable for children, so we decided to make educational films about the social relationships of children. Is there anything else you wanted to add about those shorts you made during this period? Because I think you're a pinch more well versed than I am. You did touch on homework.
Yeah, I mean, in addition to homework, there's uh, at least a dozen, if not more,
Hmm.
shorts and like very much shorter feature length documentaries that are still all on the Criterion channel for anyone listening and watching. Like, definitely, that's where I've been able to see them. There, there's this ability, like watching them, if for nothing else than just to see how he develops it for his features, is this ability to take, I guess, like a kernel of, or like a little like push. It's almost
Hmm.
like those oh, what is it, like the, I don't know, just something that like builds this kind of like kinetic energy, and you just like let it go. It's almost
Hmm.
like a domino effect, I think, is what I'm trying to say, where like he'll tell a child, like he'll ask like a little question, and then it's a question that he knows the child is going to need to really think about because of, like, let's say, like a moral uh conundrum of like, why didn't you do your homework, or like, do you think that that was okay? And just to see that thought, you might as well like literally be watching the thought run through the child's mind, because like you're watching like every emotion in its like
Hmm.
simplest form play across this child's face, and then he takes that ability to provoke, and then what he does in the trilogy, especially, which I'm sure we'll talk about, of like, having a character say like, oh no, it doesn't bother me, like that's not good enough. It's like, no, 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 I'm pretty sure it does, and I'm
Hmm.
going to keep digging,
Hmm.
because it's like that's where his cinema is. It's in
Hmm.
that provocation.
Yes.
So
Perfectly put.
yeah,
Um,
thank you.
I also think it's worthwhile mentioning what was going on in Iran during this period with Kiarostami's work with Kanan. And I know you know a bit more about this than I am, but I think it's important to touch on the Iranian Revolution, or the fall of the Shah, which was between 1978 and 1979. Before the revolution, Kiarostami's films saw Tehran usually associated with corruption, whereas the post-revolutionary films, which we'll get into, saw our leads taking refuge from Tehran in rural villages or nature. Is there anything you want to mention here?
There's the post without turning it into a whole like crash course. um the 80s feature an 8 year or so long war between Iraq and Iran, that the fallout from that is pretty much the entirety of what we see in these four movies, because this is a war that cost Iran little over $500 billion. And because of US sanctions, which then fueled other countries to impose sanctions on Iran, the economy is just tanked. Which is why, especially in something like Taste of Cherry, it opens up with all of these, dozens and dozens of men asking, do you need a worker? Do you need
Hmm.
labor? Because so much of the country is out of work, which isn't helped by the fact that, like, after the revolution, the country's population doubles. And I can't think of like a worse combination of, you know, recession and economic depression paired with a booming population. And when you add that, like, since we're talking about the rural so much, the pastoral, ironically, the country ends up becoming a major importer of food. And so you have all of this economic turbulence, and a country that now, in, a decade, 2 decades after this revolution, that completely changes, that the country goes from a monarchy to a theocracy. The identity is brand new. And so to have these films where characters are lost, I think really, like that, I think is a proper context, for us to go in to everything else.
No, I think that's a really good point you make. It's never something that I think too much of when I do watch his films, but you're absolutely on the money there. So, yeah, I mean, I think this comfortably can bring us to the start of the Koker trilogy now, which is the basis of our discussion. What do you think? Yeah?
Yeah. Oh,
Good.
absolutely.
Perfect. So, with the Koker trilogy, it's worth mentioning that this has been described as a trilogy by film theorists and critics, but not Kiarostami himself. He
Hmm.
actually didn't originally approve of this designation. He said that the films were only connected by the fact that they revolved around Koker, which was a village, or is a village, sorry, in northern Iran. And if it was up to him, he would have included Taste of Cherry as well, due to its themes that are in line with the movies that make up the Koker trilogy, which is why we're discussing it today. Again, I think that The Wind Will Carry Us would have also fit, but we don't have time, so it is what it is.
Yeah.
So the three films in the trilogy were Where is the Friend's House, made in 1987, and Life Goes On, made in 1992. And Through the Olive Trees, made in 1994. And they're this wonderful blend of fiction and documentary, even, I could say, that, as we said at the start, really provided this gentle and philosophical approach to filmmaking with lead characters on some form of quest. They're usually asking questions pertaining to where they want to go, which then leads to these existential answers about life itself. Many times, these characters ask strangers for directions, and that's how we get these thought provoking musings. It's beautiful, I mean, to put it simply. But they also kind of feel like neo-realist fairy tales to me for adults. They're films that are open ended by the time the credits roll. So for me, at least, I always walk away with them feeling, I guess, wiser about life itself. What about you?
Oh, absolutely. I really love the description of a neo-realist fairy tale. It's almost, I mean, it's like taking De Sica and putting him in the Middle Eastern pastoral. Like it really, like that same sort of like astute observation, and
Yep.
again, like the attention to children, which so often, I mean, not just throughout cinema, but I mean, just in general, like the voices of children are so often not even just overlooked, but literally denied and suppressed and like ignored. And to have a filmmaker like Kiarostami who firmly believed that as a filmmaker, he should have the perspective of a child, because that child's curiosity is what makes filmmaking so important. Like the ability, what makes being an artist so important, because like if you're not asking questions, if you're not looking at things as if you've never seen it before, then why bother? And so to have someone who the majority of his work is not even just about children, but about how children see the world. And that is such, I think, an important thing. And it really, like, like you just said, like when you watch each one, like you feel like you've gained even more understanding about the world. Like you feel like you're like, oh my God, like I just developed more as a person because you've learned. Like you've literally, like you just, like it's almost like you sat through a class and like you feel better for it. And it's like his films remind you that that's the thing that you should never relinquish in any
Absolutely.
aspect of life.
Yeah, I would say that when I watch his films, the same way I feel afterwards is similar to Yasujiro Ozu movie. And I think actually that's worthwhile highlighting as well, because Kiarostami, although he never considered himself a cinephile, he had a lot of love for Ozu. He actually made a documentary dedicated to him in 2003 called Five, I believe, and it
Hmm.
consisted of long shots, static cameras, same as Ozu. But to tie that back into Kiarostami's work, I wrote down a quote here that he shared about Ozu that I think is relevant to his own work too. He said, Ozu's cinema is kindly cinema. He values interactions, natural relationships, the natural human in all of his films. I mean, what do you think about that?
Oh, I mean, that's he might as well have been
Same.
talking about himself.
Yeah.
Like,
Totally.
is like, yeah, like that's absolutely Ozu and that's absolutely him. It's like
There you go.
that's like I know that Kirasami wasn't, unless I'm speaking out of turn, wasn't one of the filmmakers that Paul Schrader talks about in his Transcendental book.
Mm-hmm.
He should be.
Mm-hmm.
Like I think with what is it, with like Dreyer and Ozu and Bresson. So yeah, so Kirasami is not one of the three, but like he should be in that
Totally.
conversation of just like
Yeah.
someone that like you look at them, like you watch it and you're like this person just gets it. And then you feel like you get it. It's not even like there's like a wall of like, great, like I don't understand what's happening. It's like you have turned another page in like the big human condition book and you're like, okay, thank you.
Totally.
Yeah.
It's the back to your domino effect. It's the domino effect of getting it,
Yeah,
basically. So,
absolutely.
yeah. So let's dive into the first of the Koker trilogy. I can't even believe we haven't started yet. We've just been going on about all this other stuff.
Yeah.
But the first is possibly my favorite of the three, and that is Where is the Friend's House, which was actually poorly translated originally to English as Where is My Friend's House? But anyway, so this movie is divine, in my opinion. It's also the first film that really put Kiarostami on an international map. And the title actually comes from a Persian poem by Sohrab Saperi. So what is it about? The film opens in a classroom where a young boy is being just very cruelly reprimanded by his teacher for not doing his homework. The teacher then tells him he'll be expelled if it ever happens again. And the boy seated right next to him is our lead, Ahmed, who we later discover when he goes home, he accidentally took his friend's notebook. Oh no, because he knows that if he doesn't return it, his friend will be expelled. So now he's on a quest, as we were saying earlier, to return his friend's notebook to the neighboring village, asking people along the way to help him find his friend's house in the time span of one day. What do you think about this movie?
So this was my introduction to Kiarostami. So
Me too.
it's fun when something that really put an artist on a global map is also the thing that you were introduced to, because like I don't know, it's especially when you're separated by decades. I mean, very similar to, like with Bergman, my introduction was The Seventh Seal. And so
Me
it's
too.
like, it's like, yeah, like you're watching it and, even though you were not there 70 years
Mm-hmm.
ago, or, with this, just a little over 30 years ago, it's like you can still understand very easily like why this came out and everyone
Mm-hmm.
said this is what we pay attention to now,
Mm-hmm.
because it still has not lost that freshness, that like verve that it has. And I think again, for such a on deceptively simplistic film, I mean, with such a simple premise of just like, you took your friend's notebook and now you have to go get it back, but like you have to navigate the world to return it. And like
Mm-hmm.
you don't know how to do it, you don't know where you need to go, like you're trusting of strangers. Like it takes that experience of, which is difficult for us to imagine, and in an age of having the world in a cell phone, of like
Mm-hmm.
getting lost or not knowing how to get in contact with someone, or like all of these things that are, were at one point very easy, very common experiences, I should say, could have been common, which are now extremely rare, if possible at all.
Mm-hmm.
It's a reminder of like how easy it was to get detached from each other, and
Mm-hmm.
therefore why those connections are so much more valuable, even if it's just simply like, I don't know, bringing your friend's notebook back. Yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, yeah, I couldn't have said it better. Like I said, it is my favorite. It really feels also the one that's the most of like a quest out of the three, for me at least. But it's also a film that, as you kind of touched on, it has roots in those other movies he made for Kanan, because it's seeking out to teach the viewer and its lead a lesson. And it concerns itself at its core about the hardships that come with being ethical. So much like his film from 1974, The Traveler, or 1989's The Homework, which you touched on earlier, Where is the Friend's House is critiquing both teachers and parents in Iran at the time for how they were treating their kids with the use of physical punishment, right? And what I love about Kiarostami here is he doesn't take a condescending tone to our lead's plight, right? He just shows him, as you were saying, as somebody who's pushing forward in a world that's almost void of empathy. In this case, when his mom forbids him from bringing back the notebook, she does so in a very mean way, and he doesn't care. He still goes. Or his grandfather, who forces him to fetch those cigarettes that he doesn't even need. And again, he's just so persistent with this goal. So yeah, I mean, did you get any other twinkles, I guess, just to piggyback on this, of magic realism here? I'm going somewhere with this, but yeah.
Okay.
It just popped in my mind. So
Okay. No, magic, that's really, that was something in grad school that I really gravitated towards. And like, I almost wrote my thesis on that, but my committee didn't like it. But that, I think there's an element of this world being heightened to a degree because it is from the child's perspective, that by heightening what this reality is, it raises the stakes of what is happening. It really, because otherwise then you could just say, well, okay, well, like, who cares? Like, if he doesn't get the notebook back, like, what does it matter?
Whatever. Yeah.
But it's also like not just about the notebook, but this child's entire experience of going through the world. And it's like there is that element of danger because he is trusting these people to tell him where to go. And so yeah, I think by, I don't know, like I want to hear where you're going with this, because this is intriguing.
It popped up in my mind because I was thinking about the mother, and then I was thinking about him being so persistent. So it's almost like a visual way for me, more than a thematic way, where it does feel like a fable. And we see those pockets of magic, like when he's going down that up and down that zigzagging path, and it just kind of feels like he immediately ends up in this unknown world to him. Like, it just seems like that path is the gateway. And then later on, when everything goes dark in the village, suddenly everything's illuminated, right? Just all of a sudden, it's just lights everywhere. And then the storm that happens later on in his house, where he's writing the homework and his mom's outside, I don't know. It just had pockets of magic. That's just how I feel, right?
Yeah, no, really. It's like, I guess you could make the argument that, I mean, that's Kiarostami's way of saying that if you pay attention, there is magic in the everyday. That like the things that I don't know, if magic is to be understood as something that is not naturally or is naturally occurring, but is surprising because it almost feels like it shouldn't be surprising, then maybe the everyday is that if you pay attention.
That's beautiful. Yeah. So you get
that's
it.
Him.
Good.
That's him. Like that's what's incredible. Yeah.
I love it. I'm also curious, really quickly. So when that old man helps our lead, the only adult who wants to help actually, he guides him to that specific house. Did you notice that it was the house that he unsuccessfully visited before?
No.
Duh. So the reason I ask is because Kiarostami was actually wondering who would notice, and I totally missed it first time around, but during this rewatch, I was like, oh my God, this is so funny because it's the house of the other kid with the same last name. So there you go. I have blown your mind.
I mean, there's something about that. I don't know to call it a trick, but like to see if the audience is paying attention. It's like you don't lose out on anything for not, but you get this little little treat if you do.
Yes.
Like,
yes.
Yeah.
Beautiful. Just a final highlight before I let you say any, I guess, parting remarks on this one. But for that repeated scene of the zigzag path with the twangy score, did you think of Wes Anderson? Because I did. Is it just me?
Wes and I have not been on speaking terms lately.
Ooh, dicey.
yeah, I his past couple have not done it for me, which is sad because I love his work, and but unfortunately, French Dispatch and Asteroid City didn't.
Bummer.
Yeah, I think he's becoming a parody of himself,
Yep.
unfortunately, which is again really sad because like I mean, Royal Tenenbaums, Darjeeling Limited, Grand Budapest, like those are like some of my favorites of all time. You know,
Hmm.
like I love him. I just think he's becoming a very expensive interior decorator.
Fair enough.
You know, but yeah, so I didn't think about that. The connection does work though. Like
Yeah.
it, yeah,
No, it made me think of Fantastic Mr. Fox for a brief second, and I kind of giggled at that.
yeah. No, I can
But
definitely see that.
yeah, I mean, is there anything you want to add to Where's the Friend's House before we move into number two?
I guess really quick, what do you think about the changing title? The yeah, the change in the title from Where is my friend's house to Where is the friend's? Like, does that do anything for you?
Yeah, I think so. I think yeah, it does on a more philosophical and broad level
Hmm.
because if it was where is my friend's house, that's quite possessive and personal to the boy, wherein when you open it up to where is the friend's house, it's open to all of us as viewers.
Yeah. No, absolutely. I that's it might as well be verbatim what I think the title does. I think it's also really fun that I think one of the ways that God is referred to is as friend
Hmm.
in Iran, and so by changing that and removing the possessiveness, you have like a collective
Hmm.
concept of, not where is my God, but where is just God's house.
Yeah, yeah.
And so, yeah, I don't know that's I didn't know that until doing all the digging
Wow.
for
Yeah.
this, but that's a fun change. But still, that just furthers what you said about
Yeah.
it. It becomes more of a group experience, a collective experience.
Hmm.
But yeah,
Yeah, I'm happy you bring that up because I didn't even think of that. So good on you. Yeah, let's move on. The next in the trilogy is 1992's And Life Goes On. This one's also translated as I believe Life and Nothing More. And this is where Kiarostami starts getting meta, and he's gonna get even more meta. But
yeah,
we can get into that later on. So for some context, in 1990 there was a devastating earthquake in Iran that killed, I believe it is 50,000 in northern Iran. Although I've seen multiple sources kind of give other numbers, but let's just go with this one.
I
So,
have that as well.
oh, okay, good,
Yeah.
perfect. So this serves as a basis for this movie. It sees a man acting as a Kiarostami stand-in, as the director of Where is the Friend's House, who, along with his son, Puya, is trying to get back to Koker to see if the two boys from the original film, who are brothers in real life, if they've survived the earthquake. So, along with being meta, of course, this is where we see even more of that blending of reality and documentary. It's also worthwhile noting that with this trilogy, and even Taste of Cherry, actually, Kiarostami mainly relied on people who weren't actors. They were actually locals, save for some characters in Through the Olive Trees, but we can get into that later. But I'm wondering, what do you think of this movie as a whole?
I think that it's my favorite of the three. Um,
Really?
yeah, I mean, where's the friend's house? I mean, is always going to be special, and it's
Mm-hmm.
always going to be great. Through the Olive Trees is just dazzling in the way that it blends all of these fictions and these non-fictions, but there's something like I can't describe how profound the conversation is with the newlywed about soccer. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
not I'm sorry, the one young man about soccer, about the World Cup.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the guy's mourning that he lost how many family members, and yet you have these soccer matches that are
Mm-hmm.
going on throughout the film, and he's like, well, earthquakes happen, but I mean, the World Cup's only once every 4 years.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
like, and it's just like thinking about that, and it's like, yeah, I mean, you need these things in order to survive. And in the wake of this tragedy, I mean,
Mm-hmm.
this earthquake was huge. It was like
Mm-hmm.
a 7.4 on the Richter scale. Like this
Jesus.
is like, let's see, I have it here. Yeah, it caused like $8 billion in damages, and what, like almost 500,000 people were displaced. Like
Mm-hmm.
that's huge.
And
But
we see that as well.
yeah, I guess like, looking at how people respond to tragedy and to loss is something that's always fascinating, and is something that always, even if you've never lost someone to an earthquake or have been displaced by something like an earthquake, something, has happened to you or someone and so like it's like an automatic connection,
Mm-hmm.
so I think that that's partly why this one kind of like stuck a little bit with me, a little bit
No, no,
more, I should say.
that makes total sense. I mean, it's my second favorite, so I
Yeah.
totally get it. What I love about Kiarostami is none of his characters are one dimensional or even two dimensional, really. I mean,
Yeah.
they're so layered and there's so much to chew on with themes and critiques, positives, negatives, and so on and so forth. And during this rewatch for this episode, I really paid attention to the class divide between our leads, which is the director and his son, and the people around them, right? And in my opinion, the director's quest, to put it bluntly, is somewhat opportunistic for himself as an artist, right? And you notice that he's constantly probing people around him for information regarding how they dealt with this tragedy. Sometimes it even gets to the point of like, whoa, dude, chill, like, leave these
Yeah.
people alone, right? Meanwhile, his son, there's a couple of moments that show how oblivious he is to the world around him. And I mean, again, he's a kid, right? So you can't really be too harsh. But there's that example when he snatches the soft drink from the convenience store rubble, and he complains that
Hmm.
it's too warm, right?
Yeah.
And then later on, as you were mentioning, the soccer match, he decides to bet against a kid, a local boy, who's going to win, but he keeps asking him for a better gift, even though this child clearly
Uh-huh.
has nothing. Like,
Yeah.
what do you
Yeah, he's
think?
like, bet more. Like,
Yeah.
yeah, I didn't pick up on that going through it, but it's obviously obvious now that you mention it. I think there were moments, not just the opportunism of the father. I think the thing that I really honed in on was the fact that the son is more often right and better
Yes.
at remembering things, which again goes into Kiarostami's whole like listen and trust children.
Yes.
I mean, the big example I think is the back and forth in the very beginning about whether the soccer match was between Brazil and Argentina or Brazil and
Yes.
Scotland, and the
Yes.
father's like, no, it wasn't Argentina, like it, or
Right.
it wasn't Scotland, it was Argentina, and and they keep going back and forth, and then when the son connects with the other little boy, and he asked him like who was the match between, and it was like,
Mm-hmm.
oh, it was Brazil and Scotland, obviously.
Yes.
And it's like if we're trusting a filmmaker, if we're trusting an artist, if we're trusting an adult, mainly, most
Mm-hmm.
importantly, with remembering and with recording that memory, you want them to be accurate, but the child is the one who remembers better.
Mm-hmm.
It's fresher for them. It's more important because it's not just another World Cup. Like this is likely the son's, first World Cup that
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
he's like conscious of, right? So
Mm-hmm.
like it means more. And I think that fallibility of memory, that limitation of cinema itself as an art form, because it is in turn an extension of our own thinking and feeling and perspective on the world, that it's like it just dynamites everything. And it's
Mm-hmm.
like, well, none of it can ever fully be true because you can't remember all of it entirely.
Yep.
And so because of that, we need to, listen more.
I
But yeah,
love that
that
you brought that
that's
up. I didn't even that didn't even really cross my mind as much as it did in the first one. The whole thing about children
yeah.
having something important to say.
The other like little like I guess doubling of the the father and the son when they get to the village and they're stopping, and it's really it's almost ridiculous how like unimportant it is, but
Hmm.
it's so I don't know, I thought it was beautiful. The son, I don't remember which one asked first of the water coming from the faucet, and what was it? Let's see. One of them says, oh, they ask, is the water for drinking? And
Hmm.
one of the women responds, yes, it comes from the spring.
Hmm.
And the response then is, but it's coming from a faucet. Oh, no, it's the son who asks first in that
Hmm.
order. And then, like, a little bit later, the father asks the same questions in the
Yes.
same order. And I love that so much because not only is it fun because it's father and son and that like their perspectives, their curiosity is very much mirrored, but
Hmm.
also because the adult is having the same
Hmm.
questioning
Yep.
as the child. And it's like that's a moment of him reclaiming, of the father reclaiming that childlike curiosity, because you could very easily just leave it as, is this water okay to drink? Okay, cool. But it's like, well, if it's spring water, why is it coming out of a pipe?
Hmm.
Right? Like, and it's like a question that anyone could easily just not ask because they don't think of it, but the child thinks of it. I love that. It's,
I didn't even think of that. That just went over my head both times I watched it, but
it
I think,
should, but it should
yeah.
though, because it's so like, who cares like where water's coming out of? But like,
Hmm.
but a child does.
Exactly.
So, yeah,
And I think that's the beauty of his movies is this deceptive simplicity that we talked
yeah,
about earlier, where if you just pay attention, you find stuff like this, or you don't, or I mean, people are
yeah,
going to pull different things, right? And you see as well, I mean, so much peace that can still be found within the most tragic of circumstances, right? It's a very observational movie, as you just showcased, and nothing dramatic happens, right? We're just
no,
observing the surroundings and constantly getting reminded of the film's title, which is And Life Goes On. We
hmm,
see this with the soccer match that you touched on earlier. Again, they're pausing the rebuilding of their lives to just enjoy something, right?
yeah,
Um, Even Puya's father, near the start of the film, the filmmaker, tells him every road leads to somewhere
hmm,
when they keep getting blocked along the way to Koker. And I do believe that out of the three, this is the one that really does feel like the most like a documentary. I even read that Kiarostami didn't even have a script. He had a 8-page outline, and he wrote the dialogue as scenes were being filmed, and it really does feel so naturalistic. I mean, did you know that about the script?
it's funny that very similar to to someone like Godard, like he
Hmm.
didn't like working
Yeah.
with
Yep. Yep.
a fully finished script, that it was more of
Hmm.
just like, here's an idea, let's run with it. And he does this, and I think this is why so much of Through the Olive Trees is the way it is because he would hear bits of conversation between like the crew or the cast members, and like that would then become a scene.
Yes.
Like, it's like, oh, that was interesting, and that was beautiful, and that
Hmm.
was profound. That should be in the movie. And then
Hmm.
sometimes like he would tell the cast of like, no, no, say it like you told like the lighting guy yesterday, just do that again.
Hmm.
Like, and I think going back to one of the first things that you said is that he Kirosami wasn't a big movie person.
Hmm.
For him, like he didn't want to be influenced by other movies. He wanted to be influenced by life. Like for him, like life is cinema. And so I
Hmm.
think to have that documentary approach to your fiction, and to have that quality of, we're going to steal not from another movie that I really love, but we're going to literally steal this conversation that I
Hmm.
just had yesterday.
Hmm.
And it's like that's the lifeblood through his work.
Totally. That's beautiful. I mean, he also did spend, I don't know if you know this, he spent a day driving to villages that the earthquake hit, I think a day after it happened.
Yeah.
And in the film, spoilers, I guess, not really, uh, the question of finding the boys isn't really resolved, right? Kind of. You see them from afar. But when asked in an interview why he failed to give more of a conclusion, he said that his desire to find the boys was sentimental for him. And he didn't want to make the film fully sentimental because he's stressed. And I have the quote here: "You can't forget that over 20,000 children were killed in that earthquake. My two heroes could have been among them." So, really, the entire quest the filmmaker in the movie embarks on is irrelevant. We are more so just watching the resilience of these people while also paying tribute to everything that they lost. Is there anything you want to add here? I'm going to pass the torch to you.
Man, that's just really, I don't know, it's just really powerful to think of, like, what I wanted as an artist doesn't matter because these people are living in tents on the side of the
Mm-hmm.
highway because
Mm-hmm.
they've lost everything. Like they've lost, like, not just like one or two family members, they've lost like 20 or 30 or 50, like so much has been lost, and instead to show that resiliency, to show the way that life just goes on, like,
Mm-hmm.
that you still have to wash clothes, you still have to prepare tea, you still have to worry about, who's playing in the World Cup, like, all of these things, that no matter how much other, external stressors get in the way, there are things that are going to have to be done no matter what. And I think that this film really, again, just like gets you to appreciate that, but without losing kind of like the, not just the curiosity, but like that little bit of, that magic, that wonder. There was the conversation between the son and the woman who was washing clothes, and he asked her like if she had children, and she said that she lost her daughter in the earthquake, and the son's response was like almost startlingly,
Yes.
like, oh my god, like, I can't believe you just said that. But like the reason why he said that, it's better that she's dead because now she doesn't have to worry about homework.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, for him, it's not like he's not thinking about this woman's grief, like he's
Mm-hmm.
thinking about the child's state of being,
Mm-hmm.
and of happiness, that like now she doesn't have to worry about that. But then he says, like, but if she's resurrected, she'll be able to appreciate all of these other things even more.
Mm-hmm.
And it's such a beautiful thing that, in a way, it's, I don't, I know for the woman's sake, but like as a viewer, it's almost comforting,
Mm-hmm.
of like, oh well, that's, you can go through all of these things and still have this love, I guess, like this appreciation, even when things have just completely, when your life has been entirely
Mm-hmm.
thrown upside down. Yeah, it really, it goes all back to what Kiarostami said of like, it's all just love.
Mm-hmm.
Like that's really it.
Totally. I mean, it goes back again to the film's title, "And Life Goes On." So,
Yeah, yeah.
boom, there you go. So, last film in the Koker trilogy is 1994's Through the Olive Trees. As we said earlier, these get progressively more meta. And so I'm just in my mind thinking of how to describe this one.
Oh,
So,
good luck.
Through the Olive
Yeah.
Trees takes us behind the scenes of the making of And Life Goes On, the previous film. Just as the director of the previous film played a stand-in for Kiarostami, the curtain pulls back even further to show us now another man who is the director, a stand-in for Kiarostami as well, shooting the second film. Um, does that make sense to you? Please?
As much as it's going to, like, I really, I was waiting for this moment because,
You
like,
knew.
I couldn't think it through. Like, in my mind, it makes sense. Like, while watching it, like, I get what's happening, but in my mind, I can't articulate the layers. Like, anyone
Mhm.
who ever said that, like, Inception was difficult to follow clearly never saw something like this, because the layers are just absurd.
Totally.
Like,
So,
there's a stand-in for a stand-in.
yeah, yeah.
Like,
But I think
yeah,
that's
no, it's,
the best way you can describe it. I don't know how else.
Yeah, no, that's it. Like you did as best as humanly possible. Like I don't even think the Wikipedia entry could strive to.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. But what's interesting here, and I actually didn't come up with this, what I'm going to say, it's actually part of an essay on the Criterion channel that Godfrey Cheshire wrote. I don't know if you've read it, but he
Yes,
mentioned
it's
that
wonderful.
so good. He mentioned that Kiarostami appears to be subtly poking fun at himself because, as we said earlier, everybody else in the movie is a non-actor. In fact, many of the crew members in the movie are the actual crew members on the film.
Hmm.
But aside from all these people, the man chosen to play the director is Mohammed Ali Keshavarz. There, probably mispronounced that, I apologize. But he's a well known actor. So Cheshire argues that Kiarostami is, quote, mocking both himself and the idea that he was becoming a foreign proclaimed grand auteur. What do you think about that take?
It makes perfect sense why I think was it when Taste of Cherry won the Palme d'Or or after that
97.
he stopped going to film festivals like to like awards
Probably around
because
then.
he just he didn't think that it was a competition
Mm-hmm.
and he didn't want I guess like the attention being put on him as like
Mm-hmm.
the creator of these things
Yep.
and so yeah like it really it makes perfect sense that he would intentionally have this fun with how not just himself but how the director as a
Mm-hmm.
structure as a figure is
Mm-hmm.
presented.
Totally. So the plot of Through the Olive Trees, that's kind of hard to say, focuses on the making of the second movie, but specifically it highlights two characters from And Life Goes On. I think you mentioned them briefly. They're the married couple, the newlyweds. And in the second film, the director stops to talk to them about why they got married the day after the earthquake. So in Through the Olive Trees, we discover that this duo isn't actually married at all. The man is pining after this girl,
Oh
and he's
God.
asking, it's so bad, he's asking for her hand in marriage, but he's poor and he's illiterate. So she won't give him the time of day. She won't talk to him at all. She doesn't say a single word to him.
Doesn't.
And her parents passed away, but her grandmother doesn't approve of this pairing, and she repeatedly tells him to just forget it, get lost. So we watch as, I guess, he tries to get her to talk and the difficulties that arise on set of having them work together. Is there anything you want to add to this plot? But I think that's pretty much it.
I mean that is it. This is honestly one of the most painful things I think that I've ever had to watch. Like, regardless of whether like it doesn't matter how real or how unreal, scripted or unscripted that relationship is, it is so painful to see somebody pouring out like every ounce of like adoration to not get like the woman won't turn a book page for him like
Mm-hmm.
it's
Mm-hmm.
so especially after you hear his personal philosophy on like who
Yep.
should be together, which is really one of the most beautiful things that I've
Mm-hmm.
ever heard of just like what sense does it make for the rich to marry the rich, the housed to marry people with homes, the literate with the
Mm-hmm.
illiterate, the literate with the literate, of like if we want to do more for each other, if we want to be better for each other and to make a better world, we should, the literate should be with people who can't read, and people
Mm-hmm.
with homes should marry the homeless. Like, we should be doing more. And like Hossein is just saying, I want a better life for you, like not just for me. Like, I want like you to have happiness.
Mm-hmm.
And she, like, if it weren't for her having to recite, to act in those
Mm-hmm.
scenes, he wouldn't get a
No,
word from her. It's so heartbreaking.
it really is.
God,
It really is.
like it's another level of cringe. Like, it's just so bad. It's just so bad. And that Truths and Dreams documentary
Mm-hmm.
for the French TV, Kiarostami revisits the actor who he revisits
Oh,
Hossein,
yeah, yeah.
and he's married to a different woman, obviously because,
This
you
didn't
know,
work out, yeah.
yeah, no, yeah, big, big surprise. And he asks, it's real. Oh, it's so worth watching because he asks the wife what he thinks about, well, what she thinks about the fact that he used to be in love with another woman.
But was he in
And
real life? That wasn't a part of the script? He actually
I don't
was?
think so. I think he was. I think he was. But then again, who
Stop.
knows? You know, like it's really, yeah. Like I think that love, that infatuation, like I think that was real, which makes it even more just like, rip, just heart wrenching.
You just blew
Uh,
my mind on a different
doesn't that
level.
make it worse?
Yeah, and now you're making, I'm gonna touch on it later, but you just made me reconsider everything. Wow.
Yeah,
One
I think, but then again, who knows? Who knows?
Yeah, when
Like,
we'll never know. We'll never know.
yeah.
That also brings me to my next point that I do want to mention, and that's although these films feel more and more like documentaries, and as these layers of reality keep getting added, Kiarostami also gives the viewer hints throughout, or I guess reminders, let's call them, that cinema alters reality, right? So that's why I wasn't sure if these two were actually, or if he was actually pining after her. I was reading a quote by Kiarostami where he explained that for him, fiction and documentaries weren't easy to separate. He just didn't know how to
Hmm.
compute that. So, because he thinks that even with documentaries, the person pointing the camera is still choosing what they want to show, right? So, this
Yeah.
perception of reality will always be altered to a degree. So, basically, circling back to those hints that he gives, one that stuck out to me and Through the Olive Trees is when we're watching the scene being filmed of the second movie of the director talking to the newlyweds, or specifically Hossein, and he asks him how many family members they lost.
Oh
And
God.
Hossein keeps saying 25. And the
Yeah.
scene cuts to the actual director telling him, no, say 65. And he keeps messing this up. He says something like, why would I say 65 when it was 25? And again,
Yeah.
it's just this reminder that cinema itself alters reality for its own gain. I mean, yeah,
Yeah.
what do you think?
No, that's one of the, again, one of the more subtle moments. Not subtle in the sense because it's repeated so much, but
Hmm.
just subtle in the sense that the number, like you think like, well, he's acting in a scene, so why can't he just say
Yeah.
the number? It's life intruding on the film. Like
Hmm.
it's life getting in the way and refusing to be turned into a fiction,
Hmm.
because Hossein didn't lose 65 members of his family. He lost 25. And it's like,
Hmm.
for him to say more is like sacrilege. Like, it's like, I guess because of how fresh it is, because of how recent, and because of the how devastating the
Hmm.
destruction, and the implication of the destruction of losing. I mean, I can't imagine losing 25 members of my family. I
Hmm.
don't even have that many, so like to lose that many would,
Hmm.
but to lose 65, and to know that you're, like, it's so real that you can't pretend anything different from it.
Hmm.
And to see that difficulty of a non-actor really puts into perspective, I think, just acting in general, and the line
Totally.
between fiction and nonfiction.
Yeah, I mean,
It's
absolutely. Yeah, that one scene really stuck out to me for it trying to convey that message the most. I can't think of another one in that movie that was as powerful. But to wrap up Through the Olive Trees, I did want to ask you one quick thing, and it came up in my research. Again, spoilers, not really. There's really not much to spoil here. But the end of Through the Olive Trees, when Hussein is pining after this girl, he's running after her. We watch this shot from afar, and she's walking away, refusing to answer his question or his hand in marriage, or yes. They get smaller and smaller as they're going away, and he finally catches up to her, and all we see is her turn around, right? And then we think that briefly they speak, and he starts running back alone the way he came, and she walks away. Now my question for you is, do you think she accepted his marriage proposal or not?
Oh no. Like, even
No.
even knowing that he doesn't get married to her, but just it would be such an about face. It'd be such a almost like uncharacteristic of her to suddenly,
Hmm.
I don't know, like, if she says anything to him at all, or just like, or whatever she does say, yeah, I didn't think that it was
Interesting.
yeah. Did you think that she like gave
So
in?
it's really interesting that we're opposites here because Kiarostami once revealed that men tended to think that she said yes, while women thought she said no. For me, because I think Kiarostami is obviously clever and deceptively simple, as we've said,
Uh-huh.
I do think he provides some hints. Again, this is totally open to interpretation, but as much as I want to agree with most women, I think that the usage of that suddenly very jovial score that appears when he starts running back after the exchange, coupled with the pep in his step, let's call it, as he's
Yeah.
practically skipping back, right? I mean, I think she said yes. I think he'd be like walking slowly, sadly. The music would be more sad if she said no, no?
Yeah, no, I don't know why that didn't why like the context clues were right there in front of me, and why I didn't think that she would have. I guess maybe I thought that it would be too hopeful for her to say yes, because after I mean, for like half the movie,
Mm-hmm.
she's just like, she's not having it. And so I guess maybe I wanted her to say no for his sake so that he could move on. But yeah, no, like the music, yeah, I think that just might have like changed how I see the ending of that. Because
I
otherwise,
I could be wrong.
I mean, but I don't think there's any, I mean, obviously there's no definite, but like
Mm-hmm.
I feel like there's more reasoning for the positive than for not. Like I
Mm-hmm.
think there's just more evidence for how you just read it. So we'll go with that.
Great. But this is why I love his movies so much because
Yeah.
they're so open-ended, right? And it leads to discussions like these. I mean, in 1995, he gave a speech. Kiarostami gave a speech in Paris that highlights this sort of filmmaking approach. And again, let me look at my notes. He said, "It is a fact that films without a story are not very popular with audiences. Yet a story also requires gaps." Voids that are up to the audience to fill in. I believe in a type of cinema that gives greater possibilities and time to its audience. An unfinished cinema that attains completion through the creative spirit of the audience. What do you think?
That's perfect.
Right?
That's very much somebody who trusts the viewer
Mm-hmm.
and is not condescending in any way, someone who doesn't feel the need to explain everything, and who again just trusts, which
Mm-hmm.
very much goes in line with how much faith he puts in children, of just
Mm-hmm.
like every person, even though like Hussein is, he doesn't have his own home, that he is illiterate, the things that he feels and the things that he says are so profound.
Mm-hmm.
They are some of the most incredible things that I've heard any individual articulate. And so to think that, well, just because he is X doesn't mean he can't have or do Y,
Mm-hmm.
I think very much is representative of a filmmaker who says, well, why can't the viewer put their input?
Mm-hmm.
Why can't they complete the story? Why can't they see the gaps, whether it's in the editing or in the story itself, and not say, well, okay, well, this must have happened, or
Mm-hmm.
this could have happened. And I think that collaborative effort between the viewer and the film, the viewer and the filmmaker, is indicative of somebody who is very hopeful, or I think very receptive of the idea that the individual is capable of anything, and that there is so much beauty to be found in what the individual can bring to a piece of art.
Yeah, I mean, you put it perfectly. I'm gonna leave it at that. That's a great way
There we
to
go.
wrap up through the olive trees. So, are you ready for the last movie of the
Oh
day?
yeah. Yeah.
This is a good one. So,
Yeah.
we finally reached Taste of Cherry from 1997. As we mentioned at the start, or I think we did, Kiarostami himself said, yeah, we did mention this. He said that this should have been a part of that grouping that critics were making of the Koker Trilogy, because he says that they're connected with that theme that concerns itself of the preciousness of life. And that's very apparent in this one.
Yeah.
Taste of Cherry was also a huge success. I'd say next to Close Up, which was made in 1990. This is probably his other most well-known work on a global scale. I think you mentioned it won the Palme d'Or at Cannes. So it's great stuff. The film follows a middle-aged man. Mr. Body is how we know him. And he's wealthier. He's driving around the outskirts of Tehran, looking for someone to help him die by suicide. And by that, I don't mean he wants them to go do something violent, but his idea is he wants to find a spot with a hole, or probably dig it up himself, that he'll then put himself in, probably take an excess of sleeping pills. I don't think he mentions that, but that's my assumption. And he wants the person to come back the next day to the same spot in the morning, throw 2 stones, and if he responds, help him out. If he doesn't, just bury him. And he's offering whoever does this a large sum of money. So there's 3 people that he tries to convince as he's driving around. There's the young soldier, then there's the Afghani religious student, and lastly is the elderly man, a Turkish taxidermist who also works at a, wildlife museum, I think. Anything you want to add to the plot here?
No, that's it.
That's it,
Like,
yeah.
yeah.
So it's important to note here that never actually do we discover the cause of Mr. Body's grief, or I guess what drove him to do this. But in one interview, Kiarostami explained that there are signs that maybe Mr. Body wasn't truly out to take his own life. He was just looking for communication or to speak to someone about his loneliness. And Kiarostami actually points to the start of the film when he stops by some, I think they were construction workers, and he could have easily asked them to do this and they would have helped him, right? But he picked people whom he wanted to have a conversation with. And to add to that, I think that the movie itself also conveys isolation, because Mr. Body is almost always in that confined car, right?
Mm-hmm.
Almost always. But it's a film that takes place solely in exteriors, yet Mr. Body's confined in this own sort of personal isolation. So, I mean, I know you had some thoughts on the reasoning behind his journey here. Did you want to mention those?
So I love the juxtaposition that you just mentioned of having this entire countryside being put up right next to the very confined space of this car. You know, like you can easily make tons of parallels of, you know, just like that no matter how often you are with other people, that you're also always like alone. Like there's always like, you know, that play back and forth. I love that for a movie about someone wanting to die. It is one of the most life affirming things that you can possibly watch, because every interaction in this film is designed from his perspective, from Body's perspective, to end life, but in turn it just ends up reaffirming the reasons for living. That, like, you know, like there are these small moments of, you know, like when his car like slightly goes off the road, and without him even having to say anything, these construction workers stop what they're doing, flock to him by the dozens, and help push him back to get back onto the road without, you know, they don't expect anything. They don't even really stop to be thanked. Like, I mean, he does thank them, but like it just happens, you know, the interaction with the security guard that like, you know, it's a holiday and he's alone, and, you know, the Body is trying to get him to leave so he can propose the, you know, the death plot to him. But you know, instead the security guard's like, you know, you could come up here. I have some tea and I'm making an omelet if you want, and keep me company. And, you know, it's what else was there? I feel like those, and then obviously the Turkish taxidermist, which is a fun little sentence, is, you know, just having someone who's older. And I think that's also interesting, that like the soldier and the seminary student are both young men, and the soldier who's you know, geared towards being aggressive, and who's like putting himself in the face of, like, you know, being killed and killing, is so viscerally opposed to death, which is really interesting, that he's like no, like I am not, like this is absurd, like stop the car, I'm getting out. Whereas the seminary student has the opportunity to, and they even talk about like what you're doing is sinful,
Hmm.
and Body has that great line of like, yes, suicide is one of the great sins, but isn't it a sin to be unhappy?
Yes, to hurt
You
other
know,
people. Yep.
yeah, and then it takes the old man to
Hmm.
say like, I don't agree with what you're doing, and I wish that you didn't,
Hmm.
but I will do it for you.
Hmm.
That like and he keeps saying of like, Body says like, throw two stones,
Hmm.
and he says, I'll throw a third just in case.
Yeah,
Like he refuses to let him get away with it easily, but
totally.
he doesn't provide a firm block
Hmm.
to what
Hmm.
Body wants. And I think the way that the film constructs this sense of being lost and of needing something, and what the something is just turns out to be human interaction.
Hmm.
And it really, I think it's gorgeous. It really is. Like I feel emotional just thinking about it. Like I really I think that again, like it's way too easy for the movie to have fallen into a trap of
Hmm.
being pessimistic or bleak, but instead it's like, here are all of the reasons why life is worth it. And again,
Hmm.
or not again, but just, with the taxidermist, of just showing us where we get the title of the film, that
Yes.
like all it takes is something as simple as the taste of cherries,
Yep.
to make you appreciate what, everything that there is.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, for me personally, similar to you, I'm sure, Taste of Cherry offers up just some of the most meaningful and beautiful thoughts on the beauty of life and finding beauty in the mundane. And as you mentioned, a lot of that comes from the Turkish taxidermist who reveals to Mr. Body that he himself wanted to take his own life once upon a time. I don't think we touched on that yet. No.
No,
Um,
no, not yet.
he took a rope to a mulberry tree to hang himself. But before he did that, he tasted a mulberry and then a few more. And suddenly he was looking around him and saw the beauty of the world and the taste of a mulberry. And he just couldn't go through with it, right? And then he tells Mr. Body, a mulberry saved my life. Later on, to your point, he says, do you want to give up the taste of cherries? That just touched me so much. That was definitely my favorite scene in the film, the whole mulberry
Yeah.
discussion. So most of the dialogue I think we see between these characters is happening in Mr. Body's car, right? And a lot of the time, as they're talking, we don't see both of them in one frame. I'm going somewhere with this. But
Uh-huh.
it cuts to a close up of one person and then another and then back and forth. And what Kiarostami did here was he filmed each of them alone, right? And he'd be occupying the other seat and asking them these questions. So, according to Kiarostami, while he controlled certain parts and got them to say certain things, it was basically spontaneous and improvised, which makes the entire thing so much more beautiful.
Oh yeah.
Is there something you want to say to that?
I think it's really fun how I think all of the time that Body is the one on screen,
Mm-hmm.
Kiarostami is the one in the passenger seat.
Mm-hmm. And vice
So,
versa.
yeah, and so like just to think of these conversations as a literal dialogue between the filmmaker and the actor, and the filmmaker and the character, and like all of this, like even
Mm-hmm.
for something that is not as metatextual as the previous two films that we talked about, it has this implicit meta
Mm-hmm.
quality to it
Mm-hmm.
that, again, it doesn't hurt anything if you don't know that, but when you do, it's just like,
Makes it
it's
stronger,
fun.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And we didn't even highlight close up today. I mean,
Yeah.
if people haven't seen that,
God.
it'll blow their minds. But
Yeah, no.
I'm not jumping there today. But I do want to highlight that the car plays a major role in Kiarostami's works, most notably here in today's discussion, Taste of Cherry, but also And Life Goes On quite a bit. But we also see it in his movies later on too. And like I said, we need another episode for that. But I always get
Hmm.
excited when I see his characters in cars in movies because I'm like, yes, we're going to get some poetry tossed our way and it's going to be
Yeah.
meaningful and it's going to be incredible. Don't you agree?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, pun absolutely intended, but you know that you're in for a ride. Like, and,
Thank you.
um, but yeah, no, I had to, low hanging fruit, The reason for that is really fun, and it's something that I can definitely relate to, and I feel like everyone who is, everyone can relate to, is
Hmm.
that he likes having these conversations in cars a lot and having characters just drive around because of how much he himself enjoyed just
Yes.
driving.
Hmm.
And I'm sure that you can relate to this, but how often have you had a meaningful, intense, deep, wonderful, memorable conversation with a friend while you were just driving?
Dude, even with my Uber driver, like,
Yeah, exactly. Like, even if it's literally like not even like something profound, but how often have you just been in an Uber and then you tell someone about that person?
yeah.
Because like that conversation, that connection was so, oh my God, I need to share this with someone.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
it's like Kirosami took that and was like, I'm going to make this like half of my cinema.
Yep.
Like,
Yep.
because it, like you remember those, like
Hmm.
you remember those times of just like it didn't matter where you were going, it mattered who you were with.
Absolutely.
Like
Yeah. So, did you want to get into the ending of the movie? Because it's an interesting one. Do you want to do that now?
it, yeah, yeah,
It's a,
it
yeah.
threw me.
So,
Like
how many, first of all, how many times have you seen the movie? Once or more?
twice. But
Okay.
the first time was about
A
a
while
decade
ago.
ago.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
So, yeah. But
yeah.
so again, we're getting into spoiler territory. Although I don't know why I keep saying that. None of this is spoiler territory, kind of. But this one is really open to interpretation. So, as
Yeah.
everyone listening could have guessed, Body keeps going to all these other men because clearly the first two won't do it. And the taxidermist, the only reason why he helps him, I don't think we actually touched on this, is because he needs the money for his sick child. So although he's opposed to it, like you said, he agrees to do it for his kid, right? So they agree on this. Mr. Body goes home that evening. He takes a taxi the next day to the spot, and or no, is it the next day? Yeah. He
Yeah.
goes home. Yeah. And then the next morning, yeah. So he goes to the spot in the morning or at night. Wait, I'm no, it's at night. Yeah. He takes the taxi to the spot at night because he has to go asleep and the guy's going to come to him in the morning.
Yeah.
There we go. So,
Well, it's the thunderstorm makes it look earlier, like,
yes.
earlier in the next day than it actually is. So
Yes.
it's, yeah.
Thank you. So he goes to the spot and then he places himself inside. The screen goes black for an extended period and the thunderstorm begins, right? And you're sitting there and you're wondering what is happening. And then the screen suddenly switches to video format. And you see Kiarostami, literally the man himself, his crew, and there's no storm. The trees are in bloom, and we see people that we saw earlier on in the film, like Mr. Body, and Kiarostami tells everyone to stop and to rest, and then that's the movie. That's the end of the movie. But what do you make of this? Because initially, when I watched it, I had no idea if I liked the ending, and then it's only during this rewatch that I accepted it.
So I was curious about the change in footage, and Kirosami said that in the lab, like the reason that that is how it is because the ending got damaged in the lab like twice. And so the ending got ruined, like
Yeah.
physically. And he said, well, I could either panic and stress out and collapse over this, or I can just respond. And this, I just learned that apparently Kirosami was very into Taoism,
Mm-hmm.
and that, and so like one of the major tenets is like not resisting change, but to be very accepting and
Mm-hmm.
very like
Mm-hmm.
responsive, as opposed to just like, like I'm not going to deal with this. And
Mm-hmm.
so he then has the ending that we see, and that makes so much more sense of like, well, what's happening,
Hmm.
because it almost doesn't matter what's happening, it's the fact that there's an ending at all.
Yeah.
And that, similar to Body's situation of like just, constantly looking for the film and looking for the way to end it. Instead, life gave him an ending for it. And what I think is really interesting is the music choice. If I'm
Mm-hmm.
not mistaken, that's St. James Infirmary, which,
Yep.
being here in New Orleans, is like this major, like that is a very classic New Orleans jazz standard about, the speaker and the song. It's like I went to visit, I think like the speaker's like girlfriend or loved one in the St. James Infirmary, like
Mm-hmm.
she's dead. But
Mm-hmm.
like, so even though your loved one is dead, you turned the experience into a song. Like
Mm-hmm.
the person lives on, the moment lives on, the experience lives on because you've immortalized it into art, or regardless of immortality, like you've captured it, like
Mm-hmm.
you've given it a new life. And that's what Kiarostami does with the ending. Like he does
Mm-hmm.
it with the film. Like the ending died, like whether the body dies or not, like it
Mm-hmm.
becomes something new.
Yeah.
Like he took it, and so it's like this weird like amalgamation of all these things, that this like confluence, that even though like on paper it probably shouldn't work,
Uh-huh.
like it does. And especially after like the screen going black, he could have ended it right there,
Mm-hmm.
but he didn't. And I think instead he gave us something way more interesting, because now, almost, can't believe saying this, like almost 30 years after, like we're talking about what it means.
Mm-hmm.
you know
That's yeah, you just blew my mind with that fact that the footage got destroyed. I didn't know about that. And I feel like that almost changes my interpretation because I went into a completely different direction than you did on
Ooh,
this.
okay.
Again, it's what we love about him is the fact that you can come up with
Yeah.
your own interpretation. But for me, yeah, for me, when that camera cuts to black, we're left with nothing, right? We're in our own isolation. And perhaps only then can we appreciate the beauty of life. And then we get that handy cam footage, right? It cuts to the soldiers we saw earlier marching along in the film.
Hmm.
And then we're reminded of something that Mr. Body said, or it was in passing. He says that his time in the military, it was the happiest time of his life, right? We also see those beautiful trees, right?
Yeah.
That surround the location, perhaps alluding to the story of the mulberry tree earlier. So, all this to say, these reminders of the beauty found in the mundane perhaps means that Mr. Body, in that moment of isolation, too realized the preciousness of life.
Yeah. Yeah. I didn't even think about that. No, I love that. Like, we don't need to see him come out of the grave. It's enough to see the reasons why
Mm-hmm.
he would have come out of the grave.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I completely forgot about him telling the soldier that, like when he was saying, like, do you guys still march like this? Do you still count
Mm-hmm.
like that? Like that he said that was such a happy time.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. No, I
Yeah.
love that.
Thank you. Is there anything else you want to add about Taste of Cherry before we wrap?
Let I guess going back, putting all of it together. Kiarostami said, whether documentary or fiction, it's all one big lie we're telling the viewer.
Mm-hmm.
And that, in like another quote, he says, like, all of it, even in a documentary or even in fiction, that it's all of these little lies that are strung together in order
Mm-hmm.
to tell the truth. And I think, it's impossible to sum up an artist, especially a titan like this, with like one phrase or one like quote or whatever. But I feel like that idea that regardless of how many lies are in it or how many lies you string together, that
Mm-hmm.
the truth is what you get at. Like,
Mm-hmm.
even if it's, regardless of whether Hossein and, through the olive trees, whether he actually loved the girl or not, like,
Mm-hmm.
what matters is the truth of the feeling that you and I and everyone else who watches it experiences. That, like, that's where the beauty is. And I think even in Taste of Cherry, of like, whether he does kill himself at the end or whether he does walk out, if you and I, as viewers, are reminded of our own cherries, our own mulberries, like that's enough,
Mm-hmm.
I think.
That's yeah, I mean that's his movies.
Yeah.
I urge everybody to watch these films to get interested in Kiarostami. He was a wonderful filmmaker. He passed away in 2016 and he was beloved by so many greats in the industry. I mean, Kurosawa said that Where is the Friend's House was one of his favorite films. You have Scorsese, who's a fan of him as well, and Haneke. He's touched so many people, including
Yeah,
myself. And there's a quote of his that I want to share that really encompasses all that I love about film and his films, and that's art doesn't make judgment. What art does is make you think. And that's his filmography, right?
that's it. Yeah.
Is there anything you want to add about him as a whole before we wrap up?
I feel like that's it. I mean, we could talk about him ad nauseum, but
It's true.
yeah,
That's all. Well, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. Do you
thank
quickly
you
want
for
to shout
having me.
anything? Yeah. Do you want to shout anything out, like your socials or your work or your podcast?
You mentioned everything. I mean, if people want to see like really long reviews on Magic Mike Double XL or you know anything to the extent on Letterboxd. I mean, I think it's just Germenis on Letterboxd, and like the handles for everything else I think are just MP Germenis. But like that's
Perfect.
it.
It'll be in the description as well. So no
Oh yeah,
worries,
perfect.
everyone. But yeah, thank you
Yeah,
so much. And I will chat to you soon. Bye.
absolutely. Thank you so much. Bye.